Good morning. So today we are joined by Carolyn Lum. She is the Vice President of Operational Excellence for Philip Morris International. Caroline, welcome to Leaders in CI podcast.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation.
Caroline, can you briefly introduce yourself and your background?
Sure, of course. Glad to do so. So my name's Carolyn Lum. I am working at PMI. Before that, I've worked in many large multi-conglomerates that are global. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, and I had the pleasure of working in a GM and Toyota joint venture when I was doing my master's. And I think that is the reason why we're sitting here today, because that experience changed my life.
Very good. So tell us a little bit more about your role. What's your day-to-day like at Philip Morris?
Very good. So as head of operational excellence in operations, my role is to help the operations function, which includes procurement, supply chain, manufacturing, engineering, etc., to drive operational excellence culture. So to drive PMI to a next level of excellence, because we have a very ambitious strategy, and it's one that it's one that really sets a high target for us. And it's one that operational excellence is really needed. So on a day-to-day basis, I guess it depends on the time of the year, what we're working on. So we're really finishing up right now our strategy deployment process, where we've taken the goals from above, from the CEO, and deployed them to the different operations functions. On a normal time of the year, we're working with various parts of the organization to improve key KPIs like on-time delivery, delivery of equipment on time. So this is really what a typical day looks like for me.
Well, jumping a little bit more in detail to the questions that the leaders in CI community are very interested to know a little bit more about you. I will start with the systems or the model that some of the companies they follow in order to introduce and to implement a CI culture. I know that you prefer a fit-for-purpose approach to implementing continuous improvement. Can you describe this approach and how you implemented such systems in the past? How is this approach different from traditional phase-gate models or pilot-based models like TPM and others?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to get to your goal. And I think let's start with what an operational excellence journey is. I think everyone starts on an operational excellence journey to get to a better place from where they are today. And some people, like you say, use phase model approaches like TPM, or other people that I've worked with have like a 4 or 5 phase model. Some people have a bronze, silver, gold phase model where they move people through. I think in the last 20 years, I've worked more on what we would call a fit-for-purpose approach. And it means a more pragmatic approach, listening to the voice of the customer to understand what are the key things in a CI toolkit that can be used to address the specific problem that your stakeholder has articulated to you. So, and the reason I think that is because sometimes in these phase model approaches, you're trying to ask people to do things that they might not need right now. And so for them, it feels like you're asking them to do something that's not really going to help them with their problem. And this is why a fit-for-purpose approach involves listening to your customer, understanding the problem statement, and then applying the tool that will help them the most at the time they need it most. And so this tends to be easier to deploy and quicker to get results.
So it was a kind of, let's say, change between a downstream approach to an upstream approach, starting with the voice of the customer and fitting it to the real needs and according to the real problems.
What happens sometimes is when you have a phase model is that the goal of the activity becomes the phase model. And I find sometimes that people lose sight of what is the business impact that they're trying to achieve when they use a phase model. And just maybe some examples, I worked at a place where there were 4 phases, and everyone talked more about what date they were going to achieve phase 1. And they didn't necessarily articulate the business impact that phase 1 was going to give them. And so I really prefer to hear, what problem are you trying to solve? What business impact will that give you? versus I need to get to phase 1 by December 2023. And so I think this is also important because we'll talk a little bit later about how do you drive operational excellence in a culture that's not just manufacturing. Because I think phased models are more tailored towards a manufacturing operations environment versus, let's say, sales or marketing, where I think a more pragmatic approach tends to get acceptance quicker and results faster.
Talking about problem solving, how do you then teach the people the proven tools that already exist, like the 8C, quality tools, SMED, or any given Kaizen events that you might implement?
Yeah. Any tool, I think, starts with an understanding of why you need to use it. What are you going to use it on, and how do you use it well? So whenever we teach any tool, let's say we start with problem solving here, it's really helping people understand, why am I doing problem solving? And so my typical approach when I'm working with stakeholders, and a lot of those are business leaders, is to ask them what problem they're trying to solve. So that helps me understand what's the size of the prize. And then we teach people how to do problem solving. And right after we do the teaching, we actually practice. And so we take the problem statement, the real problem statement, not a fake one, or, maybe I'll have this problem later, but a real problem. We teach them how to do it. We sit there with them and we actually work through the problem solving. May not be able to do it in one day, but sometimes we have to do it over a period of time. Because when you're doing the investigation phase, you find out you don't have all the information and you're going to have to go get it. So it's really about a coaching process through the problem solving phase to get them to the end. And ultimately, it's about closing the gap. So we hopefully get them to the point where they've closed the gap and they feel the impact. But I really believe it's learning by doing and not learning by watching.
So that's the key message. It's learning by doing.
Yeah. So when we get to some of the other tools, and this isn't really just how we do problem solving, it's really how we do, or how I've done any tool in the past, is taking something real, doing the training, doing it with them, and then doing it again, because it's really a muscle that you have to develop. First day you go to the gym, it doesn't feel so good. And if you keep going back, it feels better every time. So if you exercise your problem-solving muscle, your daily management muscle, whatever CI tool muscle you need, it feels better every time you do it.
So it's a kind of never-ending story, because you are seeing the results, you are getting the results, you are feeling more inspired to not to stop, to improve.
That's the thing about a continuous improvement journey, is that a continuous improvement journey never ends, because once you get to a next level of improvement, there's always something else you can fix. And, I used to work with a company that bought companies all the time. And they used to ask me, how long does this OpEx thing last? And unfortunately, my answer to them was, it never really ends. But they get it after a while. The first look was disappointment, but then after a while, when they understand it, there's always something to improve. And even after you improve something, you find something else to improve. They actually get more motivated by that versus disappointed.
It's a way of living.
It is unfortunately a way of living.
Is there a way to have your 3 skills model, the OSHIN, the problem solving, the daily management, paired with some useful tools?
Yeah. So I kind of call those 3 things like Hoshin planning, or some people call it policy deployment, or Hoshin Conran, daily management, problem solving. I call them like basic tools that you would use at home. And so I move around a lot, and I have different places that I live, and you can't afford to have a full toolkit every place that you live. So I equate these to like a hammer, a screwdriver, and a pair of pliers. Like, no matter where you live, you have those things, because something always has to be fixed that's small. I think those 3 things help you understand the problem that you're trying to solve. Are you winning or losing? And problem solving helps you fix it. To answer your question of how do you integrate those 3 things with other tools, once you've done your problem solving, you figure out that you need a different tool, like Six Sigma, like you need to do TPM, or you need another sophisticated tool in the CI toolbox. Problem solving helps you get to that point. And another example, for talking about tools, it's like going to a home improvement store. If you figure out that there's through your problem-solving process that you need to cut some tile in your bathroom, you're going to go to a home improvement store and buy a tool that cuts tile. Now, I don't have a tile cutting tool in any of my houses, but if I had to do that, during the problem-solving process, I would know that I need that. I would go to the store and buy that specific tool that I needed for this specific problem, but only after I went through the problem-solving process to figure that out. So I think
the tool that better fits the problem that you are trying to.
Yeah, because I think, sometimes I've walked into companies where they had a huge, extensive CI toolkit, and they tried to use the wrong tool for the wrong problem. But because they had the toolkit, like if you were in your basement, you'd go to your toolbox and you pick anything you could to try to fix your problem. But I think it's more about how do you educate people what the right tool is to use at the right time? Because not every tool is fit for every problem. And so I think to answer your question about when is it time to use the right tool, I think using the hammer, the screwdriver, the pair of pliers gets you to the point where you understand, what do I do next if those three basic tools don't solve the problem at hand?
We know that benchmark operationally excellent companies, they use policy deployment. How have you applied this in your...
Yeah, so again, in my past, I worked with a company that bought a lot of companies. And my task was to go work with these companies right after acquisition. And the important thing when you walk into a new company is to understand what keeps the CEO awake at night. What are the things that keep him or her awake? What are the three business issues that hold them back from moving forward? And I think policy deployment is the tool that sets the North Star. It sets the strategy that will help the CEO and the organization underneath them understand what do they need to do to strategically win. So, this guy named Larry Culp, who I admire greatly, is the CEO of GE and the former CEO of Danaher. He said, you have to know what game you're in and how do you win? What does winning look like? So policy deployment for me helps them set that North Star and then deploy that strategy through the different levels of the organization. And to make sure that everybody knows what their part is in making that strategy come to life. So I remember hearing Larry Culp speak one time, and he said, if you took every tool away from me in the CI toolbox, please just leave me policy deployment. Because if a company doesn't know where they need to go, they could be doing a lot of really good things, but they're going in the wrong direction. So I think policy deployment is where I usually started with every CEO that I worked with at a new acquisition, because that strategy deployment process wasn't very clear. And you hear a lot about people who make strategy and it sits in these days on your laptop and never actually gets implemented. But I think a policy deployment brings it to life and makes sure that every layer in the organization understands their part in making that come to life. So policy deployment to me is the most important thing, because you're like a ship without a rudder without it.
And regarding daily management, do you apply this to any type of teams, or even including the top management teams?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So yesterday I had a meeting with a group of people, and they said they needed some help. And they said, so where do we start? And I said, well, what are the goals? What are the goals of the organization, and how are we cascading these? And so daily management to me, I'm a big sports fan. I don't play sports, but I like to watch them. So I'm a sofa sports fan. But, daily management is really rallying around the KPIs that help you understand you're winning the sport that you're playing. And so if a top management team doesn't have a clear KPI, daily management cadence, it's really hard for them to understand if they're winning or losing. So I do usually start with the top management team, establishing the KPIs that help them see winning or losing. The hard part is, how do you deploy that to the next level of the organization and develop what I call the leading KPI. So maybe a simple example of a leading KPI is if you're watching a football or soccer match, if your team has 90% ball possession in a football or soccer game, the likelihood of your team winning is very high because the competitor only has the ball 10% of the time. I think the trick in developing KPIs for any team, including leadership team, is identifying the leading indicators and making sure that you have as many leading indicators as are necessary, and you make sure that your behaviors are driving all those leading indicators to be green. Because if they're green, you're likely going to win the game. So to answer your question, I usually start at the top and make sure that the tiers underneath those leadership teams have the right mix of leading and lagging indicators. And then our job is to help the teams turn those things green.
Perfect. You already mentioned this in the beginning of the introduction, but do you also deploy CI in other than manufacturing business functions like commercial, new product innovation, or even in transactional areas?
Excellent question. So when I first started my career, I was 19 years in automotive. And even when I worked at, and you can look me up on LinkedIn, but even when I worked at Danaher, I worked primarily at the very beginning on manufacturing operations topics. But we soon realized that the problem statement of the company was end-to-end. And what I mean by that was, if you even had a perfect operations or manufacturing function, some of the problems that attack a company are very much from the beginning to the end of the process. And it's almost necessary. It is necessary. It's not almost necessary. It is absolutely necessary to drive a CI and operational excellence culture, and because culture is everything in every function of the business. So maybe 15 years ago, I started to switch my focus more to how do you drive an OpEx culture in non-operations. And I learned so much because many of the companies at the company level, the company promise statement, come from the interactions between functions. So as you know, if a product is designed poorly, it'll be difficult to manufacture. So the company will have a problem that crosses two functions. So it's important to drive an operational excellence journey end to end, and that means in every function. And honestly, because some of these functions are untapped in many companies, the greatest potential for some companies is really driving an operational excellence culture in some place like sales or marketing. Because, and in fact, in the last 6 years before I came here, we worked primarily with the sales organization. And this is an organization where people say that operational excellence stuff is really nice, but it's not for me. And this is where you find usually the biggest opportunity because it's untapped and the OpEx journey has not yet started. And so we found lots of opportunities working with the sales and marketing community to drive an OpEx culture. And they did a fantastic job with amazing results.
Thank you. Yeah. How do you see continuous improvement, Kaizen or Lean, being applied in non-manufacturing? So do you see this is starting now? So it's something that will not happen soon? What is your opinion on this?
I guess it depends on the company, but I've done this probably now for the last 10 years, driving Kaizens in different areas. I used to work at a place where there was a competition, and we had the different functions and the different teams enter this excellence competition to showcase their projects. And one year we had 1,000 projects around the company, and honestly, we had every function in the company represented. So HR, we had marketing, we had different sales organizations, of course, the standard manufacturing and supply chain engineering. So I think it's important that you do this everywhere. Again, I don't think that people realize the benefit of doing this enterprise-wide. And so a lot of people still focus on manufacturing operations. I think it's happening. If you look at LinkedIn and you read people's posts, you see that other people are starting to do operational excellence and continuous improvement outside of manufacturing. So I think the movement has started. I still think there's huge potential for people to do that. And whenever I interview for a job, I always say the biggest benefit really comes from the end-to-end implementation of an operational excellence journey, not just in manufacturing or operations. And just yesterday, I had a conversation with someone in a commercial organization about how an OpEx journey could help them. So it was the start of hopefully a very positive journey next year.
So it's just a question of time, because it's just a question of the gap. So in the operations, typically they started before, and now starting in the transactional areas and the journey.
Maybe an example, I worked in a company where there were a number of manufacturing sites, and most of these sites were not fully loaded. And when I started working there, I asked, why were these sites not fully loaded? And all these sites were in one of these things that we discussed earlier called the phased model approach. And the factories were really trying to become more efficient. However, they were underutilized. And so if you go to the CEO level, the problem statement there was, I would love to have these factories run at full capacity. And the reason why they weren't running at full capacity was because we didn't have enough orders. So if you frame the problem statement that way, because if you have more orders, you're going to have more sales, right? If you have more sales, your factories are going to be more utilized. So the problem statement at that time was get into the sales organization and understand the barriers, the problems to be solved of why the sales organization couldn't generate more orders. So we actually shifted our OpEx focus from operations at that time to working with the sales organization. And a few years later, we had those factories back up to full utilization. And so, I think it's training the OpEx person lead at your company or your OpEx organization to look at the problems to be solved at the company level, not just where I work. Because if I just work in ops and the biggest problem for my company is outside of ops, I have to be brave enough to say, we need to go help those other people. And really, if those other people usually have an influence on operations, because operations is literally at the end of the chain. If we don't sell enough, you don't have enough volume. If you design a product that's difficult to manufacture, we have issues in the factory. So a lot of these things aren't doing operational excellence on operations or sales. It's really because you have to do them both.
Yeah. Sometimes it's also something like, in operations, we measure everything. So even when we are screwing or unscrewing, if 3 consecutive times we exceed the standard time, there is an help chain. And most of the times in transactional, so we don't measure that much. And we know that we can improve only what we measure. So
yeah. And then maybe back to a sales organization. If you work with a salesperson, they typically say standards are restrictive, that it takes away from their creativity and their ability to generate sales. There's a certain guardrail, what I would call guardrail, that you put around a salesperson. So there's freedom within the guardrails, but some standards that have to be done. And maybe a simple example is, a salesperson is selling stuff. They need to have what we call a sales funnel. Their funnel should be a certain size, because if I only win 25% of what's in my funnel, I need to make sure that 25% hits my sales quota. So if you don't measure your sales funnel size, if you don't measure your hit rate, what comes out of the funnel, it's very difficult to know that you're going to hit your lagging indicator of sales. So funnel size, hit rate, these are all leading indicators for a salesperson. And we typically find, or at least historically I find in some organizations, when you first start an OpEx journey with them, these leading indicators are not measured. And therefore, just by putting a little bit of a guardrail around that process, you'll get the funnel size back to normal. You get a little bit more focus on the hit rate. And these KPIs usually improve just by the fact that you put the guardrails on.
Absolutely. We have been speaking about tools and systems, and let's move a little bit to the people and to the starting with the top management. What is more important? It's top management commitment or CEO commitment?
Yeah, I like that question, because I think it's an and question. So I think it's CEO commitment and top leadership commitment. And maybe there's some situations you enter. So I've been hired into a situation where the CEO was very committed. I would say that the leadership team at that time probably wasn't as committed as he was. So the important thing was to influence through impact the other leadership team members so that they would let you in and do something. And so I think influencing the CEO to get you to someone who wants to take the help and then influences others. But I think to answer your question, it's both, because, a CEO is usually one person, And if you're going to drive a cultural change, you need to drive it through the leadership team, and they need to drive it through their leadership team. And it depends on your entry point into your situation. So if you're hired by somebody in the leadership team, you're going to have that person help you influence the CEO. If you're hired by the CEO, then you have to really do a good job about influencing the CEO to help you get a pathway into some of the other members of the leadership team. So to answer your question, it's and.
Yeah, this is a leadership intensive, so you need it.
It is, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then how can you, as a CI leader, how can you achieve this CEO commitment?
It depends, of course, where you are in the organization. And I do speak at a lot of conferences, and people ask me, I guess, I've been in this business long enough that usually now when I enter an organization, I have access to a CEO. I know that's not for everybody. And my suggestion to people is, depending on where you are in the company, is to make sure that you're driving impact through your CI activities to get noticed. Because when you get noticed and you drive impact, people want to know how you did that. So if you're not near the CEO, make sure that at least in your organization, you're driving that impact and getting that recognition. Because people like to know what winners do to win. And so I think wherever you are in the org, make sure that you're winning and that people know about it and that you get the recognition and people start to ask you how you did it. So it's a movement, it's like a movement means you have to start somewhere, and somehow you have to get other people to join you in the movement. So wherever you are in the organization, make sure you start the movement by showcasing, getting impact through your CI activities, and hopefully someday you get the CEO's eye, and they give you a nod to do this in a broader sense. But of course, it depends on where you are. I'm lucky enough at this stage that I usually have some access to the senior leadership team that I can try to influence those senior leaders.
So can we speak about a pragmatic way to engage the CEO?
Yeah, so I remember one situation where I was hired by the CEO, and 6 months after, he asked me, he said, well, you've been here 6 months now, so what have you learned and what do you want me to tell people to do? And I think I spent a lot of time, like you should, observing the current situation and understanding the problem at hand and being wise about what recommendations you make. So in this particular situation, I remember sitting there the weekend before meeting with him, and when he asked me, what do you want me to do now? And I reflected on what would make him be excited about what I was about to propose. And I suggested, I know companies who have done the things I were going to propose, and essentially it goes back to your earlier question, Antonio, driving 3 basic tools at the top level, set the strategy, know if you're winning, problem solve if you're not winning. So I said, if you can tell people to do these 3 things really well, we will make some serious progress. And he said, why should I tell them to do that? And I said, well, here's some examples of other CEOs that I know that have done this. And here's the improvement in their stock price. Now, I know stock price is not necessarily a one-on-one reflection of your continuous improvement journey. But if you do get a movement going and you do drive some significant improvement in your organization, you will move the stock price. And so I showed about, I don't remember, multiple examples of where I knew the CEO had this mindset. The stock price of these companies where the CEO had been when he or she started and a few years after their CI journey. And of course, all their stock had gone up after a couple of years into their CI journey. And he said, okay, I'll do it. So I think you have to find a way to help them understand what's in it for me. Why should I do this? Why should I trust you as a CI person, not being a CI expert myself, to say this message to my leadership team? Because that's a true story. That's a true story.
Showing the impact on the things.
That's
showing how successful the business can be with the results achieved, and how the approach can help them. So we are speaking about the CEO, but what about the other levels of the leadership? What is your way of engaging them in CI implementation?
So whenever you walk into a new situation, the CEO is not going to be the person who's doing the work. So you have to find someone in that next layer who will give you a chance to demonstrate what you're trying to prove. And one of my favorite ways of working is to influence people, because being a CI or OpEx person, you don't have line responsibility. Hence, you must actually work through an organization to show the impact. I found over the years, there's always somebody in a leadership team that tends to be willing to give it a try. I talked about starting a movement and finding a first follower. There's always someone who will listen to you, who will give you a chance. The trick is finding who that person's going to be, establishing that relationship with that person, and then driving the impact to show others that it can be done. In one situation, my first follower happened to be somebody who had worked at the company for over 30 years. Not exactly the person you would expect to be the person to try new things, but this person was very open, wanted to try, gave us a chance, and we were able to drive some significant impact in that organization. And then, of course, people in leadership teams tend to be quite competitive. So when their peer suddenly is doing something different and better, they look at them, and then they start to ask, but what is he doing different that he hasn't done in the last 30 years? So I think the key is finding that first follower, making sure that you make that person what I call a rock star, because people look at the rock star and say, wow, I want to be a rock star too. And then you start the movement, because everybody else starts to ask, what is it that you're doing different that you haven't done before? And the movement starts. And in any movement, Antonio, there's always going to be somebody who doesn't join the movement. But I think the important thing is getting it started, finding your first follower, getting a second follower, and eventually you'll find others that follow.
Okay. So in your journey, did you ever find a CEO that was not keen about CI? And if you had that experience, how could you pitch in to change his mind?
I think this is the reverse, of the CEO hiring you. I think it's getting into the organization wherever you are, finding your first follower and showing impact. And this is where at some point the CEO will look at what is different and ask questions about why is this suddenly different. So I think, every CEO comes from a different starting point. Some are new, some have been at a company for 30 years. I think it's really about the impact, because what CEO doesn't want his or her problems to be solved? And people always ask me, and this was even recently, somebody said, where should we start, Carolyn? Should we start on the easiest place? And I said, no, we should start on the hardest place. And he looked at me like, you're crazy. I said, because you can show the biggest impact there. And everybody wants to know how you fix the biggest problem. And so I think fixing the biggest problem, with strong business impact gets you noticed. And if, a CEO will notice that if you've solved a big problem that has been around for a long time. So I wouldn't say it's easy. CEOs are CEOs for a good reason. You have to prove yourself before you get noticed by them. But I think the biggest way to do this through their pocketbook.
Yeah, afterward, winning is fun and everyone likes to win.
Everybody loves winning.
Yeah. I had a sensei more than 20 years ago that he also used to tell me, Antonio, let's ask them for the biggest problems, the worst problems, the problems that they've never solved until today. And if we are capable of solving those problems, we will gain their trust and they will be open to work with us. Yeah. And
it's hard work. It's hard work, and it takes courage, right? It takes to take a big problem that nobody has solved takes a lot of courage. But really, if you have the right team behind you, if you have the right skills in your CI capability toolbox, you can solve it. I think it's really about focusing on the problem statement, getting to root cause, and making sure you're applying OpEx and CI tools to the things that you have found that are the root cause of the problem. I think a lot of people don't spend the time in the problem-solving process and try to fix everything, and then essentially don't fix anything. It's extremely valuable and worthwhile to spend that time on the problem-solving process to find the thing that is going to give you the most impact, the thing that will close the biggest gap and get you to success. And most people really skip that process, which is the most important process.
I think you mentioned something very important. Again, Kaizen CI is leadership intensive, and they have to go together in order to see the problems and to be able to implement the solutions and understand the impact on the results. Otherwise, they will not give the importance and the efforts that are needed to really solve the problems that they know that exist in the organization.
To your point, and you asked about getting leadership and how do you train leadership. I think my most impactful assignments at different companies have been through the training and education of the leadership team, because a lot of people think that the people deep in the organization should do CI and they'll fix something. But really what it is it's the leadership has to change their behavior. And I think most people miss the hard part about leadership behavior change because they think everybody else should do CI. I worked in an organization once where we took the very top leadership levels of the company through a very extensive training. Some people do 5 days, some people do 3 days, whatever, but really a training on lean tools with only leadership, teaching them what the tool is, how to use it, what it does. But more importantly, spending time on, now this is your leadership behavior when your teams start to use this. Example would be, if a team does problem solving and they show you the root cause, you can't just dismiss it. Or you can't assume that you know better than they do because they've actually gone through the problem solving process. So a leader has to learn not to be the person in the room that solves all the problem. The leader has to learn to help the team through the problem solving process and then support them when they come back to you with their root causes and countermeasures that they propose, and support them in getting those things done. And we say this a lot, leaders get in the room and they think they know the answer to the problem and they tell people to go do something. Really what leaders should be doing is coaching their team. This is how you use problem solving. And then understanding this is my behavior when they come back. Not to yell at them, not to tell them you don't believe them, but to support them because they've actually done what you asked them to do, done the problem solving and come back with what they believe are the right solutions.
Okay, thank you. So let's speak now a little bit more about delivering business impact and results. What is the most important management process to assure results?
So I think it's a little bit of a joke where I work today, and it comes from when I first started working at essentially wherever I work. What I ask people usually first off is, what problem are you trying to solve? And when people aren't good problem solvers, they get the funniest answers. My father was a financial guy, and I think from a very young age, he taught me to think in money and dollars and what would you work on if this was your money? So I like to turn problems into time or money or defects, which easily helps quantify the business impact. When I teach people how to become good CI or OpEx partners, I ask them, why are you solving this problem above all others? Why are you spending this time on this problem and not that one? And it really makes people think about, what is the business impact if I solve the left problem? What is the business impact if I solve the right problem? So to answer your question, I think it's really easy to measure the impact of operational excellence, because if you have the right problem statement, I lost X million dollars because of this, and you solve that problem, your business impact is really the gap you closed in your problem statement. And in my past, we used to collect that. We worked on this project, it saved X million dollars. And at the end of the year, I would say, look at the pot of money that you saved. Look at the pot of money that you influenced over the year. And this is really the value that we brought to the organization. So I find it quite easy to measure the operational impact of our OpEx and CI activities. But it is not necessarily a skill that many or some organizations have. And it's something you have to teach people. And I teach them usually through making sure they can articulate a clear problem statement that is related to business impact.
I guess you always implement some type of business of benefit tracking. So how do you connect CI to P&L and to the balance sheet?
And this goes back to our earlier conversation. When you're talking about a phase deployment, if you can't articulate that through the achievement of phase one, you didn't reduce inventory, you didn't improve quality, you didn't improve productivity, and you only talked about achieving the phase one. I think this is where phase deployments sometimes lose their sight and vision of why I'm doing it. And I do exactly the reverse. I ask people, why should I care that you're working on this problem? And people need to articulate back to me in some form of money why they're working on this problem. It's terrible until you get to know me, and then you love it.
You are speaking about very important things. So the way to do it. So can you talk about coaching? So what is your how do you coach the teams, the management teams?
Yep.
What is the best method to coach them?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So of course, you have to build a team of people that can coach, because you can't coach everybody. And what I find is the most difficult thing to do, really to do what I just said about being savvy on the business impact, is finding the right person that has enough business and financial acumen, as well as the right capabilities to drive operational excellence. So it's really difficult to find both. I talk about and a lot, right? You usually find somebody that's good at business or somebody that's good at op and CI, but you rarely find that person that has both. And in my experience, the key to success is building a team that can do both. So pairing someone that has the right business acumen, that has a strategic vision, and understands the three problems that their business partner is dealing with, and then applying the right OpEx or CI tools. So you have to build an army, or a group or team of people that have that and capability. Pair them with their business partner, because they have to be able to listen to the strategic challenges, the business as usual challenges, and say, I think this is the right way to do this, using an OpEx roadmap, using a CI toolkit. And so finding those people, you hear the term unicorn. They tend to be unicorns. There aren't so many of them. You'll find a few. I think the most successful people are the people that can eventually, over time, develop them. Because you can find a good business person that is logical and methodical, that can pick up OpEx and CI methodologies, and vice versa. You can find a good OpEx person that can learn the business acumen and become a good business partner with those and capabilities. So that to me is the hardest part of my job, is finding the right person for the right business partner, because they also have to have good personal chemistry. I've had situations where I had a great OpEx person with a fantastic strategic mindset and business acumen, but the personality match with the business partner was terrible. It's like the wrong man with the wrong woman, right? The wrong partner with the wrong partner. Not every person can be the partner of every other person. So I think that's also a strong element, is how do you find the right personality match between those capabilities? Because it doesn't always work, even if they're both qualified. So you have to find unicorns and convert people into unicorns.
Interesting, very interesting. I think I know the answer, but I have to put this question. So, if you could choose only one tool to deliver business impact, what would be your choice?
I have to say I favorably help. I would go with policy deployment. And the reason is, if you are not working on the right strategic topic for your company, you will still lose the game. And maybe here's a simple example. I was working in a business one time where it was a factory. They were fantastic. And in this company's business model, this company was phase 4, so the highest level. They were functioning on all cylinders, doing a great job. However, upstream, there was a flaw in the go-to-market strategy of the product that this factory was making. And so eventually the factory had to be closed. So, if you have the wrong strategy, if you have the wrong upstream thing that affects the downstream thing, you still will lose the game. And I think it's really important to have the right strategy and make sure people know what game are you playing and how will you win. And that's where I would start. If you have second choice, I would go to Daily, because I think daily management is establishing what winning looks like and making sure you win. And who doesn't want to win?
Well, it's obvious that you already played thousands of Kaizen events, so we could be here speaking the entire morning, the entire afternoon, day, and if it is not enough, so we could even continue in the day after. But I think it is already a strong message for the leaders in CI, and I'm absolutely sure that we will have more chances to engage with you and to understand more about what are your winning strategies regarding CI. But now I would like to ask you a totally different question,
Sure.
in order to finalize our podcast. So, what do you do to keep your body and mind fit and sharp?
I walk a lot, so I'm lucky enough that I walk to work. So I think it's important to get some fresh air to get yourself out of the office. I love to travel. I think it's important to surround yourself with a group of people that at work that you have fun with. And we had a team meeting a few weeks ago in London, and it was really fantastic to see how much fun we had together, how intelligent this group of people was, and how we started to really talk about our common purpose and our future next year in 2024. So I think it's important to balance work and play and not do all work and no play because, success is not measured by how much you make or what your title. It's really you as a person. And I think you have to find the right balance.
Okay. Do you have any favorite business book?
I have a couple. I have one. There's one I like, and when I usually work in a new company, it's kind of 4 Types of Problems by Art Smalley. So it really talks about the problem-solving methodologies and what kinds of problems are created or caused. And I think it helps frame people of when I'm doing problem-solving, this is how I should approach it. I talked about influencing a lot, and there's one book that I actually almost always recommend to people. It's called Influencer by Joseph Grenny. There's training. I'm not doing any advertising for them, but it is a really good class because it talks about the strategy of finding your first follower. It talks about how do you put in structural forms of influence. And the hardest part of influence is getting somebody to do it because they want to. So I think the Influencer book is really good about helping you map your influencer strategy. And then how do you actually practically apply that on your victims? I love a classic called Good to Great by Jim Collins, right? Because I think it really talks about how do you stretch yourself from beyond what you are today to be even greater than you are. And I know that Larry Culp really likes that book too. So
very good books that you like.
Very good. I love Influencer though. Again, no advertising.
Okay. Because we are at the podcast and the goal is to deliver this podcast and to share. So do you have a favorite podcast that you regularly listen to?
Yeah, I have a few. There's one called Alcott Global. It's a podcast that highlights global operations supply chain leaders. So where I currently work, we're very involved with Alcott. There's another one called Hidden Brain, and it talks about unconscious patterns that drive human behavior. Because, of course, we talked about leadership. And the success of all these lean and CI journeys is the leadership behavior. And so this helps understand human behavior and really how do you act in our complex and changing world. There's another one called The Diary of a CEO with Steve Bartlett. And it talks about remarkable stories and dimensions of our world, the most influential people, experts, and thinkers. I think there's another one I was thinking about recently when I woke up this morning. And I like to watch YouTube. A few weeks ago, there was a series called The Lean Mindset, and it was hosted by GE. And they had many different speakers, like the CEO of Ford, the CEO of Uber, and many sports people. I love sports, so I think sports analogies are really great when you talk about team. And so I think if you have a chance to get on YouTube, I would put in The Lean Mindset and watch this series of videos where Larry Culp is also featured.
Okay, thank you. Who do you think should be our next podcast guest, and why? And why?
Yeah, I could go back to Larry. I really like Larry. If you haven't had Larry on here, I think he's great. He's a role model of mine. People talk about operational excellence journeys and 9 out of 10 fail. This is what I hear a lot. I would say wherever he's worked, they never fail. So I think that's inspiration. I'm a basketball fan, and I like when coaches talk. And so my favorite sport is the Golden State. My favorite team is the Golden State Warriors, and their coach I think he's a 10-time NBA champion. I think he would be unbelievably motivational. His name's Steve Kerr. So something different, right? Not a lean expert, but somebody very motivational.
Okay. And finally, you can directly address our audience and anything that we can help you with.
So I think learning is about sharing, and I would love to hear more from this community, good, bad, or ugly, experience that you could share with me to help me understand what are some of the problems that people are dealing with out there. I've done this for multiple decades. I've seen a lot, but I'm sure there's things that I could learn from. So I'm happy to reach out to people, or you could reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I would love to share experiences, the good, bad, and the ugly, and how maybe we could talk about how would we solve this together. So I would love to hear more experiences from the audience.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, because although we know that CI, that improvements we cannot copy, it's very important to understand the journey, like you said, the success, the failures, because sometimes will help us, or most of the times will help us to support some of the tough decisions that we need to have and that we need to take in our own journey. Mr. Imai used to say that in this case, his pair of hands was enough to mention the total number of companies worldwide that were succeeding implementing Kaizen in its fullest extension, and not only some small projects here and there. So I really agree with you, and sharing is something that is really important in order to support the community to succeed in the journey. So Caroline, thank you very much. Like I said, I would love to stay here, but I know you have a lot of things to do. Thank you for your advices, for sharing your wisdom, your experience. Yes, I also agree, winning is fun. Everyone loves to win. And I'm absolutely sure that we will have other opportunities to have you and to share with you also, because this is to give and to get, of course. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. And again, thank you for your participation today, and for your good hints and some secrets, because there are some secrets in your words, and the most experienced people will understand that whenever we have a compass, it doesn't matter how the weather is, it will always help us to guide us to the direction that we need to take. So thank you very much, Carolyn. It was
Thank you so much for the
pleasure.
invitation. Thank you. Looking forward to connecting with the community. Thank you.